Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to be taking a first look at the 28mm f2.8 SE. Okay, so in this video we're going to talk about the design of the lens itself, try and answer some of the questions that I think you guys might have. We're also going to look at some sample images and we're also going to compare it directly against the F-mount 28mm f1.4 and the Z-mount 24-70 f2.8. Also keep in mind that with everything I show you in this video, this is a pre-production unit again. The kits with the ZFC aren't available yet, so just keep in mind that everything we're looking at is a pre-production unit. So when it comes to this 28mm, first thing, I'm aware that there's kind of two types of people who are mainly interested in this video. First of all, those of you that have ordered a ZFC 28mm kit, because this is that lens that will come in that kit. And then the other people who will be interested in this video are those of you that already have existing Z mount cameras, so Z5s, Z6s, Z7s and so on, and you're specifically interested in the 28mm lens as a prime lens for your existing Z camera. So I'm going to try and appeal to both of those groups, and hopefully all of those groups and different people find it useful, but we are obviously looking at the 28mm f2.8 SE. Also, I'd just like to say as well that I'm a little bit biased when it comes to 28mm because I just love 28mm lenses and the 28mm focal length. So even when I was shooting DSLR, and one of the lenses that you'll see later on, that I'd had a 28mm prime for a long time on my D850 and on my D750 before that. And it's just a lens and a focal length that I really like, the same way that a lot of people like 35 and 50, and some people hate 35. 28 is just a focal length that works really well for me. I would always choose a 28mm focal length, even my old 28 f1.4, over a 24-70, for example, just because that's the way that I like to shoot. The big confusion is, yes, there is a 28mm lens on the roadmap, and yes, there is a 28mm f2.8 lens that's had a development announcement. Technically, it's not this lens. So this is the 28mm f2.8 SE. SE stands for Special Edition. This is a completely different exterior and a completely different exterior design for the ZFC kit. At a later date, there will be a completely differently exterior designed 28mm f2.8, and that will be obviously designed towards the Z mount cameras and Z7, Z6s, and it fits in with the other Z mount lenses. It doesn't really matter which one you use, they optically are the same, the mount is the same, everything is the same, it's just the exterior design is different. In both of those cases, it's a full frame 28mm, so even the 28 that comes with the ZFC, the Special Edition, will technically on a ZFC be a 42mm lens. So when it comes to the design of this lens, obviously the Special Edition is geared towards that older style design of older Nikon f-mount lenses. We do have one big focusing ring at the front. That does have a really nice rubber outer ring to it as well. Now that focusing ring is customizable, so you could set that to exposure compensation, ISO, or aperture, or manual focus. So if you did technically want to have an aperture ring on the front of the lens, you can set this focusing ring to aperture. At the very front of the lens, you see the details of the lens. So you'll see it'll say Nikkor Z 28mm f2.8 SE. It has a filter thread size of 52mm. Now, one thing that some of you might not be okay with is that it does have a plastic mount. So the mounting on this lens is plastic. Would I be concerned about that? Would I worry about that? Not really. The lens itself is so lightweight that it's not necessarily going to cause any problems from a mount point of view. I obviously find that metal mounts are much more important when it comes to significantly heavier lenses. I would obviously be concerned if a 500mm prime had a plastic mount, but a very lightweight 28mm prime with a plastic mount isn't something that I'm going to be bothered by. Now, one thing to keep in mind when it comes to weather sealing of this lens. So technically there is weather sealing in this lens, and that's generally in the barrel. So there's seals in the barrel, so it is a dust and drip resistant lens, but there isn't a seal on the rear mount. There isn't kind of a seal on the mount of the lens. So Nikon do say that it is drip and dust resistant to a point, and it does have specific seals built into the lens. It just doesn't have that seal at the back of the lens. So just be aware of that when it's mounted to your camera, especially if you're using it in heavy rain and so on. So when it comes to some of the features of this lens, its closest focusing distance is 19 centimeters. That's actually a really close focusing distance for a 28mm. My previous 28mm f mount had a closest focusing distance of 28 centimeters. So almost 10 centimeters closer. And that does show when you're using this lens that it can focus really closely. It's not quite a macro lens, but it does mean that you can get some pretty interesting close-up shots with this 28mm lens if you wanted to. Another feature of this lens as well is that it does not focus breathe. So I've done some focus breathing tests, and the breathing on this lens is absolutely minimal. There's the smallest amount of breathing. So as with a lot of other Z mount lenses, Nikon have thought about breathing in their Z mount lenses, not only thinking about stills, but also thinking about it from a video point of view. So this lens doesn't really show any breathing, any movement in the frame at all as you're focusing from close to far. That combined with the closest focusing distance could mean that this is a good lens for stacking. So especially if you're interested in focus stacking, or if you want to use it from an architectural point of view, this could be a good lens from a focus stacking point of view, because as you run through, you get a very small amount of shift in the image itself. I've got a collection of sample images that I'll show you. So I'll run some of the sample images. There'll be a mixture, again, as I mentioned at the start. So some of these will be taken on ZFC, technically at a 42mm, and some of them will be taken on a Z7 at a 28mm. So should give you a good idea of what you would expect from a DX ZFC and what you'd expect from a full frame Z7, Z6, Z5 and so on. The other thing I want to talk about when it comes to picture quality is how this lens compares to other lenses. So I really wanted to test this against my existing 28, my 28mm f1.4, which I have right here. So this is my existing f-mount 28mm f1.4. I absolutely love this lens. I've had it for a number of years now and used it extensively on D850, and it was just kind of my walk around prime lens, as I mentioned earlier. So I wanted to see what the difference in quality would be between these two lenses. Also keep in mind that there is a vast price difference between them. This is obviously a 1.4, this is a 2.8 size difference and so on. So when we compare both the lenses wide open, the F mount at f1.4 and the Z mount wide open at 2.8, we can see that the Z mount lens is significantly sharper and handling the scene significantly better than the f-mount lens does. Now when I stop the f-mount lens down to f2.8, so both lenses are f2.8, the f-mount is stopped down and the Z-mount is technically wide open. I do feel like the f-mount is now a little bit sharper, but we would expect that after it being stopped down. However, when we stop both lenses down, so if we stop them both down to f4, I now struggle to see a difference really. I think maybe the f-mount is slightly sharper, but that we're looking at these images here at 200%, and considering the price difference between them, it just goes to show how good this small little mini 28mm lens is. So after I tested it against my 28, and it was a little bit difficult to get the images looking identical because one lens is stopped down, then one lens isn't stopped down, and stopping them down both down to f4 isn't always the best way to show you quality of lenses and so on. So I decided to test it against the Z mount 24-70 f2.8 S. A lot of you guys know that this is already one of the best 24-70 f2.8 lenses you can buy. So I compared both these lenses at 28mm, wide open at 2.8, and then also again stop down at f4. So I think again here, wide open at f2.8 between both lenses, I am amazed this little 28mm prime can stand up to the 24-70 f2.8. So even wide open at f2.8, and that continues. So when both lenses are stopped down at f4, I honestly cannot see a difference, and I'm trying to look as much as possible into the detail on my screen on Lightroom. We're at 200% here on a Z7 II, and I literally cannot see a difference between the two. Now, don't get me wrong, yes, it's sharp, yes, it's detailed. It's not perfect. There are areas where you can see color fringing, and there are areas where it's not going to be as sharp or as detailed as some of the other primes like the 50mm 1.8s and so on. But that's some of the tests that I'll do when I get a full production unit. This is just a little bit of a insight into the picture quality that you would expect from a 28mm prime, and obviously I'm working with a pre-production unit here. I've also done a couple of tests around focusing speed. Personally, I think it focuses just fine. I've not noticed anything where it was hunting a lot. I've not noticed any situations where it started to slow down. From a close subject to a distant subject, the focusing speed is more than good enough. It's not necessarily the fastest lens, but I don't think it's one of the slowest lenses either. So from a focusing speed point of view, I've been perfectly fine, especially if I'm a walking around type style of lens, travel, city, street, that type of stuff. Focus is more than fast enough for that. So in summary, I really like this lens, but I was always going to like it anyway because I love that 28mm focal length. Yes, I wish that this would have been a 28mm 1.8 S line, kind of in line with the 20, the 24, the 35 and the 50, but that's just my preference because I know that I like a 28mm lens. But for a lot of you guys, you're going to obviously like this because of its smaller, lightweight. Yes, it's an f2.8, but I think that's still good enough for most things. So this is going to be my kind of go-to walk around lens now for size, weight, and still good picture quality, and it's a focal length that I love, and it has me really excited for those other smaller compact lenses as well. So there will obviously be a non-special edition version of this, and there will also be that 40mm compact lens as well. It'd be really interesting to see when I can test that 40mm against the 50mm 1.8. That's going to be something really interesting to compare, because how much better is that 50mm 1.8 going to be for the added size and weight and so on. All in all, really like this lens. If you're after a small, lightweight, slightly wide angle 28mm, then it's a fantastic lens, whether you have a ZFC, whether you have a Z50, whether you have a Z7 or a Z7 II. Okay, so if you have any questions, or if there's anything you want to know about this lens, or if there's anything else that you want me to test when I get a full production unit, as always, do let me know in the comments below. If you found this video useful, please do give it a thumbs up, please do give it a like. That helps me massively. It means that YouTube shares my videos with more and more people, and that obviously is a big important thing for me. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, then please do. I'd love to be able to hit 30,000 subscribers very soon, so if you haven't subscribed, please do. As always, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.